We have been, the past Lenten season, journeying with Jesus. We started out in Bethany, and we hung out with Mary and Martha, and we also watched and celebrated as Lazarus was raised from the dead. And then that week of weeks began as Jesus rode down on the Mount of Olives down into the city to the temple courtyards where he cleansed the place of the moneylenders and all of those folks. And then we walked with Jesus to the upper room, to the Garden of Gethsemane, to the high priest's courtyard, to Pilate's judgment hall, and then this past Friday to the cross. And this morning, we gather with these women. There's different names that are shared by the different gospel writers, but we would probably guess that there's 5 to 6 women that have come to do for their friend, to do for their teacher, what was the last thing they could do for him, which was to take care of his body. So they come that morning, that first Easter morning, as they come in the twilight, the barely dawn, the darkness just giving way to light, and they have a lot of questions on their minds. Who is going to roll the stone away? Who is going to protect us from the Roman guard? You know, Romans weren't the best people, especially if you were women alone. They weren't famous for taking care of women. So all kinds of questions, all kinds of fears. And maybe this morning as you gather here, you've got questions. You've got questions on your heart. You've got questions in your mind. You've got questions, even if you, like those women, heard Jesus make promises. Jesus said that after 3 days, the Son of Man would rise. And yet, what was going on in their lives, what they saw happen with their eyes as their friend, their rabbi, was crucified and died, that reality seemed to shout louder than what they had heard Jesus say. And maybe today, the reality that you're living in is shouting louder than the story that you know to be true. Maybe there are questions, maybe there are doubts, maybe there are fears like those women as they came that morning. Maybe maybe your mind has questions, your doubts. Maybe you're asking, if Jesus is risen from the dead as we celebrate, if God is for me, how come what's going on in my life right now is going on in my life right now? And how am I going to get through it? So we join those ladies as they gather at the garden tomb with our questions, with our wonderings. And already things seem to be changing because Matthew tells us there was an earthquake. Now in the scriptures, whenever an earthquake is recorded, that usually means something is changing, something big is happening. So they knew that because that was their tradition as well. So maybe they were wondering, worried about change. What would they lose? What would they gain? What was going on? What could happen? Maybe you're wondering the same thing too. I remember last year at this time as we gathered for Easter, we did it online. It was the first time in 30 plus years of ministry that I didn't preach on Easter morning. We taped that before. We taped it like Thursday or something. So it was the first time in 37 years that I figured out what the world does on Sunday mornings. You know, they take walks. They go out for breakfast. They do non-church things. And that was very strange. That was very weird. It was a beautiful day. It was sunny. We walked out here to the church to put our flowers and the crosses. And there were other people from the community that were here too, to add their flowers, to add their hopes, their prayers for the meaning of Easter to be part of their life as well. And as we walked here and as we walked back home, there was, in the sense of the world as we felt it, you could sort of feel this hopeful feeling that yes, things were going to be different because it is Easter after all. And yet there was a fear that things were going to get worse because the pandemic was just unfolding itself. And the guidelines and the rules and the changes that came with that were just starting to make themselves known and felt. And so there was joy, but there was also anxiety. There's also fear. So I think we find ourselves having a lot in common with those ladies that Easter morning as they gathered, as they came to the tomb. When I think about fear, especially fear that's just really out of control fear. There's a story that I was reminded of. It was in the news a while ago, like 1972 a while ago. That was when the gentleman died. His name was Shoichi Yokio. And Shoichi had been a Japanese soldier in World War II on Guam. And during the Battle of Guam, he decided he didn't want to be killed, didn't want to be shot, didn't want to be part of the war. And so he fled into the jungle. And now he was raised in a culture that you don't dishonor your family, you don't dishonor your country. And so he knew that the expectation, the cultural expectation that he would meet if he came out of the jungle would be that he should prefer death to dishonor, that he should prefer death. And he didn't want that as his consequence. He didn't want that as the result of his life. And so he stayed in the jungle from 1944 until 1972, hiding in the jungle. That's a long time. Guam is not a big place. If you've been there, you know it's not a big place. So he got really good at hiding because he was really afraid of losing his life. He was really afraid of the blame and shame that would come on him and his family once he was discovered, once he was found, once he came home. He even said as he came home that he regretted the embarrassment of his return. So much was his fear of shame, his fear of dishonoring his family. So he stayed separated from him. In fact, when they came to rescue him, he fought the people who came to rescue him. He didn't want to be saved. I think of him because I think as we live in this world, but not of the world, we kind of live like Shoichi. We know the stuff we've done, the stuff that's happened in our lives, the way we've responded, the way we've acted, those things we hold in our hearts, those things that we've said with our mouths, we know them. And some of those things have brought us embarrassment. Some of those things have brought us pain. Some of those things have brought us shame, and we don't care for any of those consequences. And so like Shoichi, we want to go and hide from one another, hide from that shame, hide from that blame, hide from ultimately God. We want to stay hidden because we're afraid that the culture, like Shoichi, he was afraid that that culture of death still pervaded, still ran the show. If he came back to Japan, if he came back to his family, he would face the same culture that he left, that he abandoned in World War II. And I think that you and I, even though we know it's Easter, even though we know the story, we're afraid that death still might have a handle on us, that death might still intrude itself on our lives, that judgment might still be part of our consequence. And so we wonder if anything really has changed, like those women as they came. Think about those women. Even though Jesus had said, after 3 days the Son of Man will rise, they came to care for the body of their friend. They came to do the last thing, the last honor that they could for their friend. They were going to take care of his body. They were still living under the assumption that that culture of death still held tight to their lives, still defined who they were. But Matthew gives us a clue, as he gives them a clue, as he tells their story. Matthew tells us that everything is different. He does it in a very subtle way. I mean, if you're reading Matthew, you think, oh, he's just telling you what day it is. But actually, he is telling you what day it is, but he's telling you it's a new day. Because he says very early in the morning, just before dawn, the women went to the tomb on the first day of the week. Now, you know, the Old Testament, the Jews counted the Sabbath. The week led up to the Sabbath. And so they counted the weeks that way, to the Sabbath. That was the all-important day, that day that God rested after everything he had done was done. And Matthew wants you and me to know that that's exactly what Jesus had done in the tomb, is that he rested after he had done everything he came to do. His work was completed. He shouted out, "It is finished," on Good Friday, and then laid in the tomb. on the Sabbath, completing God's purpose for the Sabbath. So that very early on the first day of the week, Matthew's telling you everything has changed. It's a new way of counting time. It's a new way of living. It's a new culture, if you will. The old culture is gone. The old people in charge are gone. Now, in place where death would reign, in place where judgment would reign, in place where sin would reign, now Jesus reigns as the one who has risen from the dead, the one who has swallowed up the grave, the one who has reached into the grave, reached into death's mouth and pulled out life, pulled out resurrection, the one who has reached into judgment and pulled out forgiveness, the one who has reached in to the old way and turned it inside out and now brought the new life, and brings that for you and for me as we meet him at that garden tomb. As we meet him there, we meet the same news, that everything is different. That everything is different. Even though it still feels the same, doesn't it? I mean, you drove through the same traffic, you came to the same streets, everything still kind of looks the same. The same concerns are out there as they were yesterday. If you had paid bills yesterday, the same bills are due today. The same, if you had an argument with a friend, that picking up the pieces after that argument still needs to be done. Those fears that you had before, they seem to be still holding on, don't they? That shame that you hold in your heart, that anger or that hurt that you still hold on to, those things are still there. Those doubts are still there. So how do you know it's different? How do you know what is different, you might be asking, as I meet the women at the garden tomb. What's different? What's different is what we celebrate, that Jesus has risen from the dead. And Jesus doesn't just rise and somehow disappear or go away. The fact that Jesus is risen from the dead does not only change everything, it also changes how he meets us, how he deals with us, how he comes to us. He comes in the midst of the things we're doing. The women, for example, these women were given a job. The angel said, go and tell his disciples. So they went off to tell the disciples. And on the way, Matthew tells us, on the way to do that, Jesus meets them in their task. So that Matthew is telling us by telling this story that whatever it is you're doing, tomorrow you're going to go to work, Tuesday you're going to go back to school, whatever schedule you've got going, whatever's happening, whatever job you have is going to be there. But Jesus meets you in that job, in that task, so that it is changed, it's transformed. We call it the doctrine of vocation, to use fancy words. But what it means is that Jesus changes the reason that we do those things. He changes the reason as he meets you and me in those tasks. He makes them tasks that are for him rather than for your boss or to get the job done or to pay the bills or whatever. He changes them into things that we do for him, but we do with him. And then what about those fears? What about those doubts? What about that pain? What about that hurt? Do I still have to carry that in my heart, carry that in my head? What happens later in the day? Matthew doesn't tell us in these verses here for our text, but what happens later? Remember where the disciples are. The 11 are gathered in that same upper room, and they've got the shutters locked, and they've got the doors locked because they are living in fear. They are living in fear, right? They're afraid that what happened to Jesus is going to happen to them. That any knock at the door will be a Roman soldier. Any conversation in the hall might be someone from the temple come to arrest them like they arrested Jesus. They are hunkered down in fear. They are not thinking theologically. They are not thinking rationally. They are thinking according to their animal brain, as we call it. They are ready to flee. They are fleeing. They lock the doors. They're hiding. They're hunkering down. They think no one will find them. Jesus shows up in the midst of it. And does Jesus scold them? Does Jesus reprimand them? No, he greets them and gives them his peace. For you and me, that tells us that Jesus is going to meet you in whatever moment you're in. If you're in a moment where you're carrying some burden of guilt, some burden of shame, some hurt from long ago, Jesus is meeting you in it and saying peace to you, giving you his peace. If you've got some job to do that seems so huge, this huge stone to be pushed up a hill, this huge task to be done, Jesus is meeting you in the midst of it and giving you his peace. Meeting you in the midst of it and continuing forward with you in it. So that you and I don't need to be afraid. We can have confidence that Jesus is meeting us. Jesus is going with us. Jesus is with us. He makes that promise at the end of Matthew's gospel. I am with you always. Count on that. You know, there's this Bible verse in Philippians. You might have it on your confirmation certificate. You might have it on a pillow embroidered in there. It's Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I really don't like that translation. You're thinking, well, Pastor, that's what everyone holds on to. But I have read too many confirmation essays on that verse where the writer just basically assumes that Jesus wants me to win my soccer game. That Jesus wants me to get the raise. That Jesus wants me to have what I want. And they take that verse out of the context. Because go back to the context. What's happening around there? Paul says, I've been beaten up. I've been welcomed. I know what it is to live in plenty. I know what it is to have nothing. I know what it is to be in pain. I know what it is to be in joy. I know what all of life's circumstances can look like. And I don't give up. I don't panic because I know whatever I face, this is how I'd like it to be translated, that I can face anything. I can face everything through Christ who strengthens me. He will carry me through. He will meet me in the middle of it and walk with me through it and carry me through it where he needs to do that. I can count on him because this is the one who has risen from the dead. This is the one who has overcome the cross, the tomb. This is the one who reaches into every circumstance and pulls out his will, his work, his love. This is the one who changes everything, changes who I am. It changes the way I live in the world, changes the way I get through the moments. This is the one. This is Jesus who meets me in the garden with the women and gives me his greeting of peace and then goes with me as we leave the tomb behind. Amen. And now may the peace that passes all understanding keep our hearts and minds in true faith in Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.